The first thing I heard was the crash. One moment I was sitting in the decorated chair at the center of my own baby shower, laughing with my guests, one hand resting on my swollen belly, feeling completely happy for the first time in months. The next moment, my sister Amber dropped to the floor like a stone, knocking over the entire gift table as she went down. Wrapped boxes tumbled everywhere. A vase of pink flowers shattered against the hardwood. Then the screaming started. "Amber!" My mother's voice cut through the room like a knife. Within seconds, every single guest rushed past me, the pregnant woman, to crowd around Amber on the floor. She was clutching her chest with both hands, gasping loudly, her eyes rolling back like she was about to lose consciousness. My Aunt Carol started crying. Someone shouted to call an ambulance. My cousin Keisha pressed her hand to Amber's forehead while my mother knelt down and begged her to stay awake. I sat frozen in my decorated chair, surrounded by pink balloons and baby streamers, completely forgotten by everyone in the room. That's when I quietly picked up my phone. "Let me call her doctor," I said. Nobody heard me at first. They were all too busy hovering over Amber, straightening her legs, fanning her face, speaking her name in soft, panicked voices. My mother was practically in tears. My Aunt Carol kept repeating "Lord have mercy" over and over again. I stood up slowly from my chair, my belly heavy, my heart hammering inside my chest. I found Amber's doctor's number in the Family Contacts app. She had insisted we all save it years ago in case of emergencies. I hit dial and turned on speaker before anyone could stop me. The phone rang twice. "Good afternoon, this is Dr. Owen's office," the receptionist said clearly. "Hi, I need to speak with Dr. Owens, please. It's urgent." My voice stayed steady even though my hands were trembling. "May I ask who's calling?" I took a slow breath and looked around the room. Every face slowly turned toward me. Amber's gasping softened slightly, just enough for me to notice the change. "My name is Glory," I said clearly into the phone. "And the woman lying on the floor right now is my sister." The room went very still. Dr. Owens came on the line within a minute. I kept the phone on speaker and held it so the whole room could hear every word. "What seems to be the problem?" he asked in a calm, professional voice. I described everything. Her collapse, the clutching at her chest, the gasping, the way her eyes had rolled back. I told him we weren't sure if she had taken any medication today. I gave him her full name. There was a short pause on the line. "That's strange," Dr. Owens said slowly. "According to her chart, Amber shouldn't be experiencing those symptoms. The condition she has listed as her primary concern doesn't present that way at all. Are you certain she hasn't taken anything that could cause a reaction?" Amber suddenly stopped gasping. Not gradually, just stopped. She turned her head and looked directly at me with cold, sharp, completely focused eyes. It lasted only a second before she started gasping again. But I had seen it clearly. So had my husband Nate, who was standing beside me with his arms folded, watching everything. Before I could respond to the doctor, my mother grabbed the phone right out of my hand and ended the call. The room fractured into awkward pieces after that. A few guests quietly gathered their bags. Some hugged me quickly and murmured apologies before slipping out the front door. Others stood around looking confused, their eyes bouncing between me and Amber on the floor. The happy, cheerful energy that had filled my house just 30 minutes ago had completely vanished without a trace. Meanwhile, Amber sat up. Within 10 minutes of the phone call ending, she was sitting upright on my couch, sipping juice, perfectly composed. She let my mother fluff a pillow behind her back and accepted a warm blanket around her shoulders. She even managed a weak but graceful smile when one of the remaining guests asked how she was feeling. My mother spent the next 15 minutes scolding me in the kitchen, her voice low but sharp and cutting. "You stressed her out," she hissed. "You know how fragile she is. Why would you put her on the spot like that in front of everyone?" I stared at my mother. I thought about all the pink balloons still floating in my living room with nobody left to admire them. I thought about the guests who had left without ever watching me open a single gift. Then I walked away without saying a word. That night sleep wouldn't come. I lay on my back in the dark, one hand resting on my belly, staring at the ceiling. Nate was breathing slowly beside me, but I couldn't stop my mind from going back through every important moment of my life. My high school graduation, where Amber had fainted in the parking lot 20 minutes before the ceremony. The attention swung to her so fast that our parents missed my name being called. My engagement dinner at my favorite restaurant, where Amber had suddenly developed chest pains halfway through the meal. Nate and I ended up driving her to urgent care while our food sat cold on the table. My wedding rehearsal, where Amber had collapsed backstage and caused a 30-minute delay. The rehearsal dinner was cut short so the whole family could take care of her. Every time, every single important moment in my life, there had always been an emergency. I had spent years telling myself it was just bad timing. Unfortunate coincidences. Amber's health was delicate and life wasn't always fair. But lying there in the dark for the very first time, I let myself think about something I had been too afraid to think about. What if none of it was real? The next morning over breakfast, Nate set down his coffee mug and looked at me carefully. "Can I tell you something?" he said. "And I need you to really hear me." I nodded and waited. He told me he had been watching Amber closely at the shower. Right before she collapsed, he had noticed her glance toward the mirror hanging on the far living room wall. She had smoothed her hair and adjusted her dress very quickly, almost like a reflex. He thought it was strange but dismissed it in the moment. Then just before she dropped to the floor, she swept her eyes slowly across the entire room, left then right, as if checking that everyone was watching before she let herself fall. I sat very still while he talked. "I didn't want to say anything yesterday because I wasn't completely sure," Nate said quietly. "But after what the doctor said on the phone, I'm sure now." I thought about how quickly she had recovered. How she had gone from nearly unconscious to sipping juice in under 10 minutes. How she had glared at me with sharp, clear eyes while supposedly struggling to breathe. The performance looked a lot less convincing when I put all the pieces together at once. By 9 o'clock the next morning, the family group chat was already buzzing. My Aunt Carol posted a long message asking everyone to pray for Amber's recovery. 3 cousins replied with heart emojis and warm, "Feel better soon" messages. My mother posted a photo of Amber resting on the couch, wrapped in a blanket, eyes closed, looking like she was barely holding on, with a long caption about how brave her daughter was and how grateful she was for everyone's love and prayers. I read every message while sitting at my kitchen table with cold tea in front of me. Not one single person in that group chat asked how I was doing. Not one message said, "Sorry your baby shower was ruined." Not one heart emoji for the pregnant woman whose celebration had been completely swallowed whole. Nothing about me. Nothing at all. I scrolled through the entire thread 3 times just to be completely sure I hadn't missed anything. I hadn't. I put my phone face down on the table and looked out the window for a long time. Sunlight came through the glass in warm stripes across the floor. Outside, the world looked completely normal and undisturbed. Inside, something old and painful was beginning to crack open in my chest. That same evening, while Nate was in the shower, my phone buzzed with a private message from Keisha. Keisha was the cousin who had pressed her hand to Amber's forehead during the collapse. We were close, but we were not the type to trade gossip. Her message was short. "Has she ever done this to you before?" I stared at those 7 words for a long moment. Then I typed back, "Yes. Many times." "Why?" Keisha's reply came quickly, like she had been waiting for me to answer exactly that. She told me about our cousin Bella's wedding 3 years earlier. Keisha had been there as a guest. In the middle of the reception, just as Bella and her new husband were cutting their wedding cake together, Amber had grabbed the edge of a table, made a terrible gasping sound, and slid slowly to the floor. The entire wedding party abandoned the dance floor instantly. Bella had cried, convinced something truly terrible was happening. By the time the paramedics arrived, Amber had already recovered enough to ask someone for water. The paramedics found absolutely nothing wrong with her. I sat on the edge of my bed with my hand pressed over my mouth, reading Keisha's words slowly. Twice. 3 times. 4 times. 4 days after the shower, I drove to the pharmacy near our neighborhood to pick up my prenatal vitamins. It was a perfectly ordinary errand on a perfectly ordinary afternoon. I was thinking about nothing except getting home and putting my feet up. That's when I saw Amber. She was walking out through the pharmacy entrance, a small paper bag in one hand and her phone pressed to her ear. She was laughing, a full real laugh, her head tilted back, completely relaxed. She moved with easy, confident steps across the sidewalk. There was not a single trace of exhaustion or weakness anywhere in her body. She looked perfectly healthy. Better than healthy, actually. She looked wonderful. I stopped completely still on the sidewalk. For a long moment I just watched her, trying to match this image against the memory of her gasping and clutching her chest on my living room floor just days ago. Then she saw me. The change was instant and total. Her smile dropped. Her laughter cut off mid-breath. She slipped her phone into her pocket and brought her free hand slowly up to her stomach, pressing it there, letting her shoulders curve inward. A careful, practiced expression of discomfort moved across her face. I had just watched her turn it on like a light switch. The following week, our mother invited the family for Sunday dinner. I went mostly because Nate thought it would be smart to keep things calm before the baby arrived. I didn't want more conflict. I just wanted peace. After the meal, I slipped away to the bathroom. On my way back through the hallway, I heard voices coming from the kitchen. My mother's voice and Amber's voice, low and pressed close together. I stopped just outside the doorway and pressed my back against the wall. It worked though, Amber said. There was a quiet satisfaction in her voice that made my skin crawl slowly. Everyone stopped paying attention to her. My mother was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "You need to be more careful, Amber. The doctor thing got too close." Nobody believed her anyway. I know. But still. I stood in that hallway without breathing for what felt like a very long time. My hands were flat against my stomach, feeling my baby move underneath. My mother knew. She had always known. And she had said nothing. Done nothing. She had just protected Amber year after year, while I stood in the background wondering why I always felt invisible in my own family. I walked back to the dining table and sat down quietly without a single word. That night something shifted inside me. It wasn't pure anger. It was more like a door swinging open that I had kept tightly shut my entire life. And once it opened, I could not push it closed again. I had spent 31 years being the quiet one, the good daughter, the one who never caused problems, never demanded attention, never made scenes at the wrong moments. I had convinced myself that being low maintenance was a virtue, that staying out of the spotlight made me the stronger, more mature person. But standing in that hallway, hearing my sister say, everyone stopped paying attention to her, like it was some kind of victory, like my ruined baby shower was something worth being satisfied about, I finally understood something important. Being quiet had never protected me. It had just made it easier for them to keep doing this. I sat with Nate that night after we got home and told him everything. The conversation in the kitchen, the message from Keisha, the pharmacy. All of it in one long, honest conversation. He listened without interrupting once. When I finished, he looked at me steadily and asked, "So what are you going to do?" For the first time in my life, I didn't say nothing. I didn't say, "What can I do?" I said, "I'm going to end it." Dr. Owen's words had stayed with me since the phone call. I kept replaying them in my head every morning. According to her chart, Amber shouldn't be experiencing those symptoms. That sentence meant something very specific. He hadn't simply said he was surprised. He had said shouldn't be. Like he knew her chart well enough to recognize immediately that what I was describing didn't match anything in it. I needed to understand what was actually in that chart. Keisha worked as a medical records assistant at a clinic on the other side of the city. It wasn't the same clinic as Dr. Owen's, but Keisha had connections throughout the local medical community from years of working in healthcare administration. She understood how health records worked, what could be shared and what couldn't. I called her and asked a careful question. Not for records, not for anything that would break any rules. I simply asked whether she had ever heard anything through professional channels about what conditions Amber actually had on file with any doctor. Keisha went quiet on the other end of the line. "Are you sure you want to know?" she asked. I pressed the phone against my ear and looked out the window at the gray afternoon sky stretching above the neighborhood. "Yes," I said. "I'm completely sure." Keisha took a long, slow breath before she began. She told me about a medical administration workshop she had attended 2 years earlier. One of the other attendees worked at Dr. Owen's clinic. They had become friendly over the weekend, and one evening over dinner the topic of difficult patient cases had come up in conversation. Amber's name had never been spoken out loud, but every single detail matched perfectly. Keisha described a patient who had repeatedly presented dramatic physical symptoms, sudden collapses, chest pains, serious breathing difficulties, that always disappeared quickly and left absolutely no medical trace behind. The clinic had run every appropriate test: blood work, heart monitoring, breathing assessments, neurological screening. Everything came back completely normal every single time. The notes on the file, Keisha's colleague had said quietly, repeatedly flagged suspected exaggeration of symptoms. The patient had been gently encouraged multiple times over several years to speak with a counselor about stress and attention-related behavior patterns. The patient had declined every single referral. I sat with that information for a long time after the phone call ended. I kept thinking about every emergency, every collapsed moment at someone else's celebration, every ambulance that arrived and found nothing wrong. There was nothing medically wrong with my sister. There never had been. Once I knew the truth, I couldn't unknow it. The more I sat with it, the more obvious the pattern became in ways I couldn't believe I had missed. It was never random. Not even close. Every single incident had happened at someone else's milestone. My graduation, the moment I crossed the stage and made my family proud for the first time. My engagement dinner. The night I announced I was building a life with someone who loved and chose me. My wedding rehearsal. The day before I officially became a wife. And now my baby shower. The celebration of a new life growing inside me. Amber didn't have medical emergencies. She had a schedule. Her crises were triggered by attention moving somewhere it wasn't supposed to go. Somewhere that wasn't her. The moment a room filled with love for me, she found a way to drain it completely. I pulled out an old journal I had kept since my teenage years and turned through the pages slowly. Every entry that mentioned an exciting moment in my life was followed, sometimes within that same week, by an entry about Amber being unwell. I had written it off as stress, as bad timing, as worry. I had been explaining away clear evidence my whole life without ever letting myself see it. I was folding baby clothes 3 days later when my phone buzzed on the dresser. It was a message from my friend Tara, who had been at the shower. She had filmed parts of the party on her phone, planning to put together a small memory video as a keepsake gift for me after the baby arrived. She had gone back to review the footage that morning. "Glory," her message read. "I think you need to watch something." She sent the clip. It was about 40 seconds long. I pressed play. The video showed the living room at the height of the party. Guests laughing, the gift table covered in pink ribbons, soft music playing in the background. The camera panned slowly across the room. In the background, clearly visible near the far wall, stood Amber. I watched as she looked slowly around the room, left then right, her eyes moving across every face, measuring the space deliberately. Then she looked directly at the gift table. Then she moved. Not stumbled. Not fell. Moved. She stepped closer to the table, reached out and tipped it with her elbow. Then she let her knees buckle underneath her. The whole thing took exactly 3 seconds. I watched the clip 6 times in a row. Each time it became more chilling than the last. I spent the next several days deciding exactly how to handle what I knew. I didn't want to scream. I didn't want a messy, emotional argument that could easily be dismissed as pregnancy hormones or oversensitivity or me making things bigger than they were. I wanted something clean and completely undeniable in front of everyone at once. I called my mother and told her I wanted to have the family over for dinner. A small gathering to share some pregnancy updates and spend time together before the baby arrived. She sounded genuinely happy. She said Amber had been resting well and would love to see me. I kept my voice warm and casual. I said I was looking forward to it too. On the evening of the dinner, I set the table carefully and made a simple, comfortable meal. Nate stayed close to me all evening without making it obvious. Keisha arrived early and sat near me on the couch. When Amber walked in, she was moving slowly, one hand pressed lightly against her side, wearing a soft, tired expression. She greeted everyone with small sighs and quiet comments about how exhausted she still was from her recent episode. Several relatives nodded sympathetically in her direction. I smiled at her from across the room and asked warmly if she wanted to sit down. She said yes. I let her get completely comfortable first. After dinner, when everyone had moved to the living room and settled in, I stood up calmly and picked up the remote. I wanted to share something with everyone, I said, keeping my voice relaxed and pleasant. A friend filmed part of the baby shower, and I thought it would be nice to watch it together. I connected my phone to the television and pressed play. At first it looked like ordinary party footage. Guests laughing, the gift table decorated beautifully with pink ribbons, music playing softly. Everyone in the room smiled watching it. But then the camera found Amber standing near the far wall in the background. The room watched her eyes sweep deliberately across the crowd. They watched her gaze fix on the gift table. They watched her step forward, tip the edge of it with her elbow, and then let herself fall. The silence that followed was immediate and completely total. Amber was on her feet before anyone else could form a single word. "Are you seriously doing this?" she snapped. All the softness had left her voice instantly. "You're attacking me at a family dinner? You're attacking my health in front of everyone." She looked around the room, searching urgently for backup. But the faces around her were different this time. Quiet, uncertain, uncomfortable. Nobody rushed to agree with her. My mother was the first to speak, and she did exactly what I had expected her to do. "Glory." Her voice was sharp and controlled, the voice she used when she needed to manage a difficult situation before it grew bigger. "That is enough. Your sister is not well. You are standing here humiliating her in front of this whole family, and I will not allow it." She stood up from her chair and pointed at me firmly. "I want you to turn that television off and apologize to your sister right now." "Apologize for what?" I asked quietly. "For bullying her. For making her feel attacked when she is already struggling with her health." I looked slowly around the room. Two of my older aunts were frowning, but not at me. My Aunt Carol, who had cried the hardest at the shower, was sitting completely still, staring at the floor. Keisha met my eyes from across the room and gave me the smallest, steadiest nod. "Mom," I said, keeping my voice very quiet. "This isn't about feelings. This is about the truth." Amber turned to the rest of the family, her voice high and urgent. "She's jealous of me," she said. "She has always been jealous of the attention I receive. That's what this whole thing is really about." Not a single person in the room answered her. The room had shifted completely. I could feel the change in it like a temperature drop. Not everyone was fully convinced yet, but the automatic, unquestioning protection that had always shielded Amber from consequences was cracking open right in front of me. I picked up my phone from the side table. "There's one more thing I'd like us to do," I said. My mother started to speak, but I was already dialing the number. "Maybe we should just ask her doctor," I said simply. I placed the phone on the center of the coffee table with the speaker turned on, and the volume high enough for the entire room. The line rang twice, then 3 times. Amber stared at the phone on the table. Her jaw was tight. Her eyes stayed fixed on the screen like she was calculating exactly how much damage the next few seconds could cause. My mother took one slow step toward the coffee table, but Nate moved smoothly into the space between her and the phone, not blocking her aggressively, just standing there present and steady. She stopped moving. On the 4th ring, Dr. Owen's after-hours service answered. I identified myself calmly, explained that I was following up on a family health concern, and asked to be transferred to speak with the on-call physician about Amber's health history in general terms. The hold music played softly into the silent room. Dr. Owens himself came on the line. I hadn't expected that, but I was deeply grateful when I heard his voice. I reintroduced myself, Glory, Amber's sister, and explained briefly that my family had some important questions about the nature of her documented condition. I asked if he could confirm, in the most general terms, what kind of physical symptoms her condition on file would typically cause. There was a brief pause before he answered. Then, in a calm and completely professional voice, Dr. Owens said clearly, "I want to be careful about patient privacy, but I can say this in general terms. Amber's file does not document any condition that would produce episodes of sudden collapse. She has no cardiac condition, no neurological disorder, and no respiratory illness on record with this practice." He paused for one more moment. "She has been encouraged on more than one occasion to speak with a mental health professional regarding stress-related behavior patterns. She has declined each time that has been suggested." Amber lunged forward. Her hand knocked the phone hard sideways across the coffee table, but the speaker was still connected and on. Every single word had already reached every person in that room. In the terrible quiet that followed, nobody moved. Nobody spoke. 8 people sat in my living room, processing the same truth at the exact same moment. The silence stretched long enough to become something solid you could almost touch. I looked slowly around the room. My Aunt Carol had both hands pressed against her face. My Uncle Theo, who rarely said much at family events, was shaking his head with slow, heavy movements, his eyes distant and far away, like he was replaying years of old memories and suddenly seeing them all completely differently. Keisha sat forward on the couch with her elbows on her knees, nodding quietly to herself. My mother had sat back down in her chair. She wasn't talking anymore. She was just staring at the center of the coffee table where the phone lay, the call still technically connected through the speaker. Amber was still standing, but the energy inside her had completely changed. She wasn't performing anymore. The soft, tired, fragile act had disappeared entirely. What replaced it was raw and defensive and furious in a way I had never quite seen from her before. "You set this whole thing up on purpose," she said, her voice stripped of every trace of its earlier weakness. "Yes," I said simply and clearly. "I did. You humiliated me in front of my own family. You humiliated me at my baby shower," I said. "In front of every person I love. After doing the same thing at my graduation, my engagement dinner, and my wedding rehearsal." She had absolutely no answer for that. Neither did my mother. Amber didn't reach for her stomach. She didn't clutch her chest or begin gasping for air. There was no performance left in her to give. The room knew the truth now, and performing for people who already know the truth is completely impossible. Instead, she fell apart in the real way. Not the dramatic, carefully calculated kind of falling apart she had practiced and perfected over years. The ugly, uncontrolled kind that has no audience and no purpose. "Nobody in this family has ever truly supported me," she said, her voice cracking and raw. "Nobody has ever cared about what I needed. It was always Glory. Always her milestones. Always her big moments. Always her life being celebrated." Her voice kept rising, unsteady and exposed. "I just needed someone to notice me. I just wanted people to care whether I was okay." She looked desperately around the room, searching for someone to reach back. But the faces around her were quiet and closed. Not cruel, just exhausted in the way people get when something has been going on too long. "I'm done," she finally said. She grabbed her bag from the chair, walked to my front door, and slammed it shut behind her so hard the windows rattled in their frames. The room stayed completely still for a long, heavy moment. Then my Aunt Carol said very softly, "That girl needs real help." Nobody in the room disagreed. What happened after the door slammed was something I had not fully expected. One by one, people began to speak. Quietly at first, like they were carefully testing whether it was truly safe to say what they had been holding back for years. My Aunt Carol was the first one to reach over and take my hand. "I owe you an apology, sweetheart," she said, her voice unsteady. "After your shower, I should have asked how you were. I didn't ask. Not once." My Uncle Theo nodded slowly in agreement and said he had always sensed something was off about these situations over the years, but he had never known quite how to name it or what to do. Two of my younger cousins admitted quietly that they had always assumed I was exaggerating whenever I said I felt overlooked in the family. "We should have listened to you," one of them said honestly. Then the whole room turned toward my mother. She hadn't moved from her chair. Her hands were folded tightly in her lap. She was looking at the space between her feet, her expression completely unreadable to me. I didn't go to her. I didn't accuse her or demand anything from her. I just waited in the silence. After a very long pause, she finally looked up at me. Her eyes were red but dry. "I'm sorry, Glory," she whispered. "I didn't protect you the way a mother should have. I'm so sorry." After everyone left that night, I sat in the quiet living room with Nate beside me, and both hands resting on my belly. The baby was moving slow, steady, rolling movements that always made me feel completely grounded and present. I had already replayed the evening 100 times. The video on the television, the phone call on the coffee table, Amber's face at the moment she finally stopped performing, my mother's apology spoken in a small, honest voice. I didn't feel triumphant sitting there. I felt tired and deeply sad and strangely calm all at once. Nate asked me quietly what I wanted to do next. I thought carefully before I answered him. I told him I had already made my decision. I wasn't going to cut everyone off completely, but I was going to be honest, clearly, simply, and directly, with every person in my family who wanted to stay in my child's life going forward. The next morning, I sent a message to my mother, my aunts, and each cousin who had been at the dinner. I kept it short and honest. I told them I loved them. I told them I was willing to keep building our relationships carefully, but I would not raise my daughter in an environment where manipulation was protected, where cruelty was excused as fragility, and where the truth was something to be managed rather than honored. Anyone who wanted to be truly present in her life had to respect that completely. My daughter was born on a Wednesday morning in late spring. She came into the world screaming loud and strong, which Nate said immediately was a very good sign. I held her against my chest in the hospital room and felt something settle permanently inside me. A deep, unshakable quietness that no amount of drama could ever disturb. We named her Maya. The people waiting outside that day were Keisha, Tara, two close friends from work, and my Aunt Carol, who had driven 40 minutes to be there. My mother came later that evening, holding a small bunch of yellow flowers, moving carefully like she wasn't completely sure of her welcome. I let her in. I let her hold Maya. We didn't talk about Amber that night. We talked about the baby's tiny curled fingers and the shape of her nose and whether she looked more like me or more like Nate. It was a beginning. Small and careful and honest but real. Amber didn't come. I hadn't expected her to. In the months that followed, I heard through Keisha that Amber had finally agreed to see a therapist regularly. I hoped quietly and genuinely that it would help her. Not for my sake, but for hers. Because what I had watched her do for so many years was never really about power. It was pain wearing a very convincing costume. But that was her journey to walk. Mine was right here, in this room with this baby, with this life that finally completely fully belonged to me.